Hi, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. Come on in and make yourselves comfortable. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join us. Great to see everyone coming in. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Jay. It's great to see everybody. Hi, Kim. Lots of people coming in. Okay, well, let's get started. I've got a little bit of just sort of housekeeping and welcomes before we get into our great session today. So welcome to this AMP Network session. This is a Signature Live, where we dive beyond the pages of Signature Magazine to explore a recent cover story. Today, we are welcoming Scott Steen of APS and Rob Lee of ASAE as our panelists. We have Carla Caligaridis as our facilitator of our great conversation today. I'll let everyone introduce themselves in just a moment. But I wanted to welcome everyone here today, especially those of you who may not be members or maybe new to AM&P Network. Maybe you were a member in previous years or you saw us on social media recently. And so whatever the case, we are very glad you're here. We can take a quick look at what AM&P Network has to offer. We certainly have Signature Magazine, where this session originated. We've got a couple of in-person events throughout the year and lots of virtual events and awards programs happening regularly. Here's a look at what's coming up on our calendar. We've got the Excel Award entry period is open now. It's open through the very beginning of March. So be thinking about what categories you might want to enter this year. We've got a lunch and learn planned for next week. We are covering emerging trends in marketing and content and more. These are our New Year's evolutions. And then in February, we have 2 speed networking events that are geared toward you meeting your next freelance resource. So we've broken it out into 2 sessions. The first session on February 9th is for connecting with freelance editors or writers. And then on February 16th, it is connecting with freelance designers, photographers, illustrators, whatever that may be. And then I mentioned our BIMS event is happening in February, and our Amplify Content and Marketing Summit is back in June at the National Housing Center in DC. We hope you join us for that. A couple of other notes before we begin. We follow a code of conduct in all of our spaces, and we have a strong statement regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have an antitrust statement. It's important to avoid discussion of sensitive topics, including specifics around pricing. We are a CAE approved provider, and you can apply this session for 1 credit hour. And so this session is set up as a Zoom meeting that you're all here to be able to participate in, kind of a roundtable style discussion. First, we'll have a short conversation among our panelists, and then we'll open it to a larger conversation where you all can ask questions and be part of the dialogue. So for that portion, we just ask you to either use the raise hand feature or pop your video on so that you can come to the front of the class and talk with our panelists and be part of the conversation. The captioning is enabled, and so to see that, you can go to show captions and view full transcript. And so with that, I would like to invite Carla to kick us off today. Hi, Carla.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see your faces and your names popping up on the participants list. As Jen said, this is an interactive session. It is designed to help continue the conversation that started in Signature in the article, the cover story on this topic. We're not rehashing the cover story. We might pull in a few ideas from it here and there. But the idea is so that you can, after reading the story, you've now got the opportunity to talk to experts that were featured in the story and just say, you know, what did you mean by that? Or can you tell us more about this? So that's the idea at Signature Live. And this is like our 3rd or 4th one. So we're still sort of new, but we're super excited and we're glad that you guys joined us. I do want to let you know you're welcome to ask questions. And there's a couple of ways you can do that if you want, and there's no wrong or right way. I should say that as well. We welcome in all formats. You could type something in the chat if you like. You might find that other people respond to it in the chat. But if you want to ask something of the speakers, you could type it in the chat. I will do my best to see it. If I don't, then Jen will hopefully call my attention to it. And Another way is you could raise your hand virtually, of course, or literally with Zoom. So there's a Zoom tool, of course, where you're allowed to raise your hand. Again, hopefully I'll see it. There are a lot of people on the call. If I don't, Jen will wave and interrupt, and then we'll give you the floor and you can ask your question. And if you don't want to ask any questions, that's great too. Okay, with that, I would love to welcome our panelists, Rob, Lee, and Scott Steen. And Rob, of course, is with ASAE, as you can see by that wonderful branded background. Scott is with the American Physiological Society. We've all decided, we had a little meeting before this started, and we decided this is a dog-friendly call. So if you see any dogs popping up in the screen, it's all perfectly pre-approved. Yeah, there we go. We got one back there. It's all pre-approved, so don't worry about that. I would love for you gentlemen to just start us off by, Scott, we'll start with you, just who you are, what your role is at your organization, just a little bit like that, and then we'll let Rob do the same, and then we'll start with some questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I am delighted to be here with all of you. I am especially delighted to be here with Rob, who is my former colleague at ASAE. So we've known each other, I was thinking, for almost 20 years. So it's been a long time. Rob doesn't look old enough to have known me for 20 years, but I look old enough for the both of us. So I'm Scott Steen. I am the executive director of the American Physiological Society. And I really came up through Marcom. And I've been a director of marketing communications in my distant past in my career. And so I have always sort of seen marketing communications as really, really critical function, a strategic function within the organization. This is my third time as a CEO of an organization. So I guess I've been a CEO since 2006, so a long time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. And Rob, would you do the same? Introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit what you do there at ASAE.
Of course. Well, before I get to the ASAE part, I take care of 3 kids, my family, and this guy who is hiding underneath the desk at my feet right now. So apologies in advance, but appreciate the dog-friendly atmosphere and environment. So my name is Rob Lee, and I'm Chief Marketing Officer at ASAE. I've been around for actually 20 years for Scott's comments, so now the secret is out. But I love Scott. Scott and I go way back, as you know, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with Carla and Jen, and thank both of you for pulling this together, and just excited to have a conversation with all of you. I mean, as we all know, in the association space, it's always about the conversations and the learning opportunities that presents. At ASAE, I'm responsible for all things that you might expect from a chief marketing officer perspective, but it also includes associations now, which is our media brand, digital media brand. And I'll talk a little bit about that in our conversation today, and certainly open to any questions that you may have, and just look forward to getting started. So thanks for everybody for attending.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you both. So let's just jump right in. I've got, like I said, I've got some questions, but absolutely welcome any kind of additional questions from the audience. But let's start with some of the ones that I have. Marcom, let's talk about stereotypes, okay? Marcom, a lot of times when it comes to change, Marcom folks, professionals, are not the ones necessarily driving the change. They are the ones communicating the change, right? But this discussion is about Marcom as change agents, right? And so I would like to talk about this stereotype first. The stereotype of, and this was in the article, the Marcom person is a guardian of the style book, defender of the Oxford comma, and that's sort of where their safe space is and their sweet spot. How do you convince? How would each of you convince someone like that to sort of embrace communications as a leadership role and to think about their role in terms of leadership? And then second half of that is, how do you get the rest of the organization to see Marcom as not just the one that takes the strategy handed to them and runs with communicating it, but instead is actually part of those strategic initiatives and coming up with them? And Scott, maybe we'll just start with you and see what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. And first, my team is the slayer of the Oxford comma, and I am they police me constantly in removing anytime I put an Oxford comma in. So Stacy just came on board.
Okay,
She's
that's
like,
a
yep,
subject
yep,
for another
that's
webinar. We can give it
I can't get away with an Oxford comma if my life depended on it. So I guess I like the way you started in that I think leadership doesn't start with changing other people's perceptions of you. And it starts with acting like a leader. And so it really, I think, is about seeing the role differently. If Marcom sees itself as sort of merely defenders of the style guide, or I think very often a conveyor belt to turn out endless ads and brochures and web pages dictated by other departments. If it sees itself just as a support service for other departments, then I don't think it will ever be seen or effectively be a leader within the organization. But I think if instead Marcom leaders see their roles as sort of embodying the most fundamental values and goals of the organization, making them visible in the way they talk about the organization, in the visual identity of the organization, then I think that that Marcom can become really a driver of kind of strategic importance for the organization, really helping to define how members, how others, and even what happened at my own organization is it drove a change even in the way we saw ourselves, meaning the staff saw the organization. We changed the way we talked about ourselves, we changed the way we looked, and that changed who we thought we were and what we were capable of. So a brief example, when I came to APS, Marcom was largely seen as just a service provider. It was an order taker. And other department directors would actually dictate what color they wanted the brochure to be, and would do little drawings of what they wanted and give it to our marketing communications people. Now that has completely changed. And I think almost nothing happens in the organization without marketing communications at the table. Certainly, almost every major project starts with marketing communications at the table.
Okay. Yeah, and Rob, either you or Scott can jump in on this. What if you want to act like the leader, but the other departments don't see you that way? And it's kind of like, oh yeah, nice idea, little Marcom person, pat on the head. Go back over there and look at what I told you to do with the colors, right? I mean, what do you do if they're not seeing you as a leader? And maybe Rob has some thoughts about that, because your association is about leadership. The Center for Association Leadership, right in your tagline. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, everybody now knows why I love Scott, because I can just listen to Scott talk about things and it just sounds good. And I agree with him too. He's obviously brilliant. And it's nice to have, I know from a Marcom perspective, having a CEO that sees the world the way Scott does is critically important and helpful. One of the things, I don't know what an Oxford comma is. I'm kidding, but the point of this is that and I think Scott touched on, and that is, what do you want to do? How do you want to lead? And I think the way I would convey this is that, what I think about it is, I think in business terms, I think in organization, what the organization is trying to accomplish, what are the gaps in that? What are the opportunities? And then secondarily, begin to think about, well, how can Marcom be helpful to that? And I think Scott touched on this, Marcom is often used as a tool to accomplish something that someone else has already decided needed to be done. And I think part of the opportunity from a leader standpoint is to get in front of that conversation. So as opposed to having conversations about, the creative, having conversations about the campaigns, having conversations about what are we trying to achieve as an organization? How are we going to go about doing that? What's the process that we're going to apply up front? Process, planning, process development, implementation, evaluation. What are the kinds of things that we're going to put in place before we ever get to marketing? And that's something that is a shift, because I love marketing. I love creative. I love a whole bunch of things that I've done throughout my professional career. But if I show up that way all the time, that puts me in that box. And that box is then always the receptacle of, okay, let's go ahead and Rob, go do the campaign, or have your group go do, X, Y, Z. And I think that's kind of a pivot / transition point that I think is important.
Okay, fantastic. Scott, did you want to add anything, or do you want me to jump to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the pivotal question in a way, and and I think that you can use creative actually as a change driver itself. I mean, but you have to ask a different set of questions, I think. And when we started this process, I came to APS about a little over 4 years ago. We began to ask some very basic questions about our mission, our brand, like what is our essential offer to our members and to society, and kind of what is the world calling us to be? And we came up with two things. We play a critical role globally in enabling dissemination of scientific information about about human health and about our understanding of life. And the second thing is we asked a ton of members and a lot of staff this question, and everyone came back and we learned that this is a deeply personal community. It is something that people were their entire careers were formed by their involvement with the society. But if you looked at our materials, if you looked at our messaging, if you looked at how we portrayed ourselves to the world, neither of those two things came through. I mean, so we weren't really driving the essence of our brand with our marketing communications, and at least not a lot. And so now, we really, in 2 years, our Marcom department completely transformed the image that we were projecting. And we developed this really dynamic graphic identity. We launched a new magazine that focused on the people behind the science to kind of stress that community aspect. We changed our website to kind of be a balance between people and science. We got rid of stock images of people and only hired professional photographers to take tons of pictures of our members. So everything is actually showing the real people. We changed our language. We changed, so we drove that kind of through all of these channels. And it changed how we saw ourselves and how our members saw us.
Okay, let's talk about content, but in terms of publications, magazines, whether they're print or digital, newsletters, web content. A lot of times associations take the approach of, we're here to serve the industry, and this needs to be about the members, and this needs to be about our people and the profession or the industry that we serve. What about communicating the association's mission? Like the kinds of things that you're talking about, Scott and Rob, about how people see you as an organization. Do you feel like that magazines, whether print or digital, and the other content that an association puts out, should that somehow be communicated separately, or should the centralized mouthpiece of the organization also have a responsibility to communicate to the members what the organization's mission is and what they're about? Do they go together, or are they apart?
So I think, Scott, you jump on. Yeah, I think you should jump in on the first part of this, because as we had a little bit of discussion, we're going to have a slightly different answer, but it's also a slightly different premise.
Yeah, and I don't think it's funny. I've heard this sort of church state argument for my entire career about association magazines, and we're not publishing Newsweek. This is not this is not it's not journalism in the sense that it is not independent journalism. It is part of the society. I think you do both, honestly, but I think you can talk about the members and be embodying the brand. I think you can focus on the work and embody the brand. I don't think you need to be obvious. If DEI is one of your core objectives, for instance, you don't have to write article after article about DEI. You should live it. I mean, you should be able to see it and feel it through the way who are the sources for the magazine? Who's being written about? Who's being profiled? And so for us, and I think we probably do both, we We do a lot about our members and our members' work and the places they work. But we also talk about the society, but we try and not have it be sharply different. We try and see that as an integrated goal for the magazine.
Okay. You mentioned church and state. And so, of course, one take on that is the idea that association content shouldn't be part of the magazine, right? That should be all about the members or all about the thing. And you just shared with us that we can talk about the members and still embody the brand. But the other church and state discussion, and this is where I'm going to pitch the ball over to Rob a little bit. That traditional church and state conversation is about content or pure editorials, one might call it, versus advertising and sponsored content and revenue driven content. And I know a lot of us struggle with that. Some associations have really made a leap and embraced it for a variety of reasons. Others maybe not so much. So when let's shift for a second and think about branded content, not just in the sense of the association's branding of content, which Scott was just speaking about. Let's talk about the branded content that others might think of, the content linked to sponsorship or revenue. Mm-hmm. What is the role of that kind of branded content in can you, I guess that what I'm saying is, can you make money off your content and still be true to your mission and still advance the communication initiatives that you're trying to advance, Rob?
Yeah, sure. And I love the way you phrased that question, particularly last comment, Carla, about, it's, everybody can win in essence with this. So, one of the ways that we are from Associations Now standpoint, and we are using Associations Now as a bit of a test case and a test model, concept testing for the rest of the organization, but it makes sense to kind of introduce it through Associations Now for a number of reasons. But, when we talk about, sponsored content in essence, it accomplishes a couple of things. One is that it allows us to provide another format, if you will, another type and different type of learning experience an educational experience for our members. So it's part of fulfilling a portfolio and a broader portfolio. I mean, as we all think about how we're exposed to information, how we learn things, knowledge writ large, it comes in a variety of forms, right? I mean, sometimes it's conversations, sometimes it's, data and theory, sometimes it's just, something very organic or some combination thereof. So part of what that begins to speak to is from a sponsored content perspective is creating the opportunity for more voices to be a part of the solution. So specifically, when you start talking about, sponsored content related to sponsors, advertisers, having that conversation with them around, okay, what is important to you? What are your challenges from a business standpoint in the community that you are, you're exploring and certainly serving? And, on behalf of ASE, what we have to think about is how does that align with the things that we know about our members and stakeholders? And if we hit that transition point, if we hit that kind of synthesis point in the right way, then what we're doing is we're providing a solution for our audience, even when it's something that is, in some instances, provided by the sponsor themselves, which is perfectly fine as long as it's a solution for the audience. That's ultimately what they want. They want answers, right? So, that space is something that we are, I'll give you a specific example. We had something, we did this twice. Associations Now Live, and it was in essence, it was a branded Associations Now news show. So we produced it downtown DC, that is. And it was, sponsored content primarily and what it was is we were inviting conversations into the arena, if you will, based on sponsors that had an interest in DEI and some other categories that we wanted to explore. What we knew in advance was that the subject matter was interesting to our audience. What we knew in advance was that the sponsors had a unique voice to share, the combination of which, made that successful. There's a different kind of sales entry point. That is not an asset-based, here's the audience I'm delivering. Rather, it's here's the solution that I'm trying to provide. And so there's a co-creation there, and it's a very different kind of mentality and philosophical approach to advertising. But I think we thought of it from the standpoint of, it's something we've all experienced. The print revenue has done what print revenue has done. Digital revenue is fantastic and interesting. It's also exceptionally diversified. And it's much harder to drive the numbers that we all were driving prior to having to kind of embrace it. So, it's been more of a business solution that we are continuing to test. And that's how we've approached. And I'm really excited about it. And there are some associations that have done a really good job at it. And I think a lot of us are struggling with it too, because it's a different philosophical approach.
Okay, Rob, Scott, anything to build on that?
Yeah, we're kind of exploring similar sorts of things as well. And I mean, many of our vendors are also sort of key scientific organizations, and they bring a level of expertise that that is sort of outside of our rank and file member, and that our members really benefit from. So I totally agree with Rob that you can do both. I mean, you can really provide valuable content and create a revenue stream at the same time.
Okay, let's continue on this for just a moment. Since the topic is really about leading change, can sponsored, and sticking with the word sponsored as in Rob's understanding of it, or definition of it, which of course is, paid for or led by a sponsor. Can branded or sponsored content have a role in the association's management of change or approach to change? Can sponsored content help lead and manage change? And the reason that I asked this question, I'll stall a little bit, give you time to think about it. The reason I asked this question is because all associations, almost all associations are looking for new revenue, right? But they don't want to dilute what they're doing, and they don't want to be seen as, oh, we're a pay to play operation. You write us the check, you can have access to our audience. But the reality of the situation is the two things: we need the revenue in most cases, and second of all, a lot of sponsors have invested significant funds into research and hiring, subject matter experts and all those things. They have great things to share. So I just want your thoughts about the role of can we embrace them without shame and let them help us lead the change and manage the change?
Sure, Scott. I
Scott, you ready to go?
can sense. Yeah, Scott.
No,
Go, John. Go, Scott.
I can wait.
Go, Scott, go.
And so, okay, I will say yes, absolutely. And so one of the things I said earlier was we wanted to drive home this idea that we are a preeminent provider of content around kind of human function, around health. And so we have developed a webinar series entirely paid for by the sponsor that we co-create, that we sit down and we choose who will present at that. And we are getting some of the biggest speakers on the world on topics like obesity and aging and sort of pivotal topics in human health. And that series has allowed us to reach, in, I think, 2.5 years, something like 50,000 registrants around the world. I mean, a number we would not have imagined. And it's because the vendor is helping us market it as well. I mean, they are using their lists combined with our lists, and we are, and they have a stake in saying we want to provide the best scientific contents possible because it's a representation of our brand too. So it is absolutely furthering our brand, this process of doing this kind of content, and their brand, and I think building together.
So I would add to what Scott said. I mean, so I absolutely agree. And so same lens from the standpoint of, we need to be stewards of the experience and stewards of the output. And when we hit that, then we're going to be in a good place. And I kind of look at it as almost being agnostic with respect to where the expertise is coming from, and rather thinking about, is it beneficial? And if it's beneficial, then I think the source of it becomes a lot less important. There's, we all know there's always going to be some tension in the association space. At least we've seen this, throughout the years around, does it feel like a pay to play, or does it feel like it's coming from the association community? And I think the answer is that the answer needs to be what's beneficial for the community. And when you hit that appropriately and hit that with the right kind of tone, I think, then the question isn't even asked because the value is there. And I have seen, but I think the challenge here is that, and Scott, began to share a bit, it's a different sales cycle. It's a different conversation. with the sponsors up front.
Mhm.
And it is based on solving their solutions, but also the association saying, you know what, here's how these are the solutions that we need for our stakeholders. Now let's co-create this and figure out how we're going to deliver that in a way that they want to hear it.
Mhm.
But let's be clear about what our objectives are. And the objectives are at the same time, they're discrete objectives, and then there's an aligned objective. And we hit those aligned objectives at the back end of that, then what that means is that the audience is going to feel fulfilled, and they'll come back and they won't even ask the question or around, okay, I don't like this because the sponsor delivered it, or whatever the other nuances are from a cultural standpoint. So I think it's definitely an inflection point, but I think it has to be, what we found at least is that the important piece is that we approach it differently up front in the conversation, and that we're really clear about what we're trying to achieve in the first place. And it is, from a sponsor standpoint, oftentimes a function of quality of the audience versus the scale of the audience. And that's why it's oftentimes a different conversation. Doesn't have to be, but it can be helpful in that regard.
Okay, fantastic. I want to pause here. Jen, is there anyone with their hand raised that I'm missing? Because I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. I know there's a lot of questions, a big debate about Oxford comma going on in the chat. That's okay.
There might be a brawl happening in the chat. We don't have hands raised, but we would welcome you to raise your hand or pop your video on at any point if you have questions as we go along.
Yeah, don't feel like you're interrupting. You're not. Okay, so if there's nobody I'm missing, terrific. That was my main thing I wanted to make sure of. Right, let's talk about, again, Marcom, the Marcom professional. Can you talk about, Scott, maybe you can share a little bit more about how your Marcom team has sort of embraced a strategy that led to change. Something where your Marcom team has been the leader or driver of change in an organization. When we were chatting earlier, you had mentioned that your magazine was just a real part of your association's change management. It was a very active part. And I know Marcom professionals do a lot more than just a magazine, but can you talk a little bit about that, where, give us some examples where the Marcom team was really the drivers of change?
Sure, absolutely. What I discovered very quickly when I came was that the Marcom team was incredibly underutilized, and it was perhaps, some of the most talented people in the entire organization were there. They just didn't really have the light on them in a way that allowed them to do what they quickly, kind of given any opportunity, stepped up and did, which was, I think, really leading our transition, our change. The magazine, I think, was a prime example of that. And we had what, when I came in, was I referred to as a 54-page church newsletter. And it was horrifying. It was, staff used it as an archive so that they could find stuff later on of their old material. It was sort of a hodgepodge. It was hideously ugly. And I talked to our director of communications, Stacy Brooks, who is here with us, and we started to sort of say, this has to be different. How do we actually use this as, how do we create a magazine? We knew we were creating a magazine at a time when no one was creating magazines. Most organizations, or many organizations, were moving away from magazines. But we thought, we need something that talks about the people behind the science and the work environment in which they find themselves, which was changing enormously. And Stacy and her team took the magazine and just built something beautiful, and built something that became one of our principal member benefits in a very short period of time. This happened in 3 years. We went from a kernel of an idea to now, I think we've won the XL Gold Award for General Excellence twice, and the magazine's 3 years old. And it has become something that people want to be in. They want to read, they refer to. It's really helped with, I mean, it's been a driver of the shift of our brand significantly, I think. And that's just one way that I think that our Marcom team has really realigned what people, has raised people's expectations about who we are and what we can be and how we can serve our members. Both internally as well as clearly with our members and beyond in the greater scientific community.
Can you talk a little bit, Scott, about what was the change? You talked about how the publication itself changed, but what was the change that you were trying to make and how people thought of your organization, and what did the publication do to help that?
I mean, we were, and my predecessor, who was a remarkable guy, is a remarkable guy. He's not dead, and he was there 33 years. And I think, like many long-term CEOs, the organization became a bit ossified. I mean, we looked, when I was interviewed for the job, one of the things that the search committee talked about was, there's perception that physiology is an old science. I'm like, well, the organization looks ancient. I mean, looks like nothing has changed in a very long time. And like, what are the messages we're sending to young scientists about whether this is an organization that they want to affiliate with? Do we look like the future? And I mean, having these conversations with our comms folks and our marketing folks early on, everyone got it. I mean, there was absolutely sort of a sense of, we'd love to make this change happen. And once we sort of started asking the questions, I think the leadership really came from the marketing communication staff, and they started to say, how do we apply this across all of the things that we do? How do we make everything we do start to look like what we want to be in the world? And the thing that I would say about that is it got marketing communications off the hamster wheel of just reacting to other departments' needs. They began to shape what we looked like, how we talked about ourselves, which I think is really the key. When marketing communications went from being a kind of service entity in our organization to being a leader in the organization.
Okay.
Yeah, Carl, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Jump in. No, absolutely jump in.
There's something, I want to share two examples, and to illustrate, to answer, your primary question around, what does it look like when marketing communications has led something? What specifically has that been? In our case, there are two things that I'll share. One of them is that for those that are ASE members, that we have this annual meeting every year, and it's the biggest event of the year by definition, but it also sets the tone, and it sets the emotional tone for the organization and for the community when it occurs. One of the things that we changed, this is some time ago now, but the creative around that is critically important. Because it is something that, when we hit it the right way, then people really get excited about it, and they want to get excited. We need and want our stakeholders and members to get excited about what's the opportunity of annual meeting. The reason I'm bringing it up, though, is because the process of how we develop that creative is something that we changed, and we changed it substantively. And we did it in the following manner. For a long time, the creative for annual meeting was based on, in essence, a lot of staff coming together and saying, what are the themes that might occur to them? What are the things that they'd like to see? And coming from a creative background that I do, particularly from the advertising side, that wasn't going to work. That was not the way to go about it at all. And I needed to shift the conversation in the following manner, shifting it to, how do you want people to feel? What are the things how do you want people to walk away from this annual meeting? What are the things that you think, not you personally, meaning staff, but rather, in walking in the shoes of your stakeholders, what do you think is important to them? It has nothing to do with that. I don't want to have a conversation about your ideas about themes. What I do want to have a conversation about are, what are the outputs? What are the results that you seek? And we take that in, and then we have a creative process that we go through. And that's how we, in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, but that's how we come up with the creative that we do. And that creative has won hundreds of awards over the years. But it is an advertising model around how to develop creative concepts, in this case for an annual meeting. And it works because we have a process that supports it. And that wasn't something that was asked for. The organization wants creative. The organization didn't say, well, actually, it was implying how it needed to be done, and that was something that we needed to shift. But that is all a function of how the marketing team approaches, creative development for annual meeting. That's one example. The second one is more of a business example, and that being that when you start talking about products and services, and portfolio management writ large, in many organizations, if you ask the question, who are the product managers? It's kind of the answer is everybody. And that is challenging because when you start thinking about in the position of marketing, trying to market and all these different types of events, formats, products and services, what have you, part of doing that effectively is understanding what's the life cycle for all of these events collectively. What are the price points for all these events collectively? What is a competitive environment for all these events collectively and individually and vertically? What are those price points increasing? Are they decreasing? There's so many different, there's a whole, obviously, subject matter areas centered around product management. And the marketing team was looking at that, asking those questions and not always getting answers, because those answers were, in essence, the questions were being asked after something had already been decided. And the truth of the matter is, who wants to hear about, I'm not sure it's the right price point or the right product after there's already been a commitment to do it. So, we developed this product management, orientation for ASAE. And I will tell you that it's worked in some instances, in other instances, it's been a challenge. But I will also say that it was something that the organization didn't ask for. No one was knocking on my door, certainly, and saying, hey, I think we need to look at our products and manage our products with this enterprise orientation at all. It was a function of the marketing team saying and asking me oftentimes, Rob, why are we doing this? We have another product that this competes with. What's the point of those types of questions and answers? We had to kind of shift that and put that on the front end as opposed to the back end. So, I think we're moving into that space more aggressively now than we ever have. So I'm very excited about that. But the genesis of it was, really the idea from the marketing and communications team thinking about how do we create more success for our products and services? So creative business, the point of it is, what are the opportunities for the organization? And what can we do to help support the organization achieving those results is where we kind of focus on.
It's fantastic. Those are great examples. Scott, did you have anything to add?
I loved what Rob just said. I think it's so important that when every department sort of has independent responsibility for managing their own approach to marketing, it doesn't look, the organization has no strategy. I mean, you're not projecting any sort of consistency in what you're trying to tell the world about your organization, or you're not pursuing consistent kind of business strategies. If marketing communications isn't at the table at the beginning and able to raise those kind of questions, be a full partner in the product, I think what you get is just a mishmash of stuff. You're not sort of presenting the organization in a consistent or a compelling way.
Okay. This is wonderful. It's a wonderful discussion. We do have a couple questions and I'd like to get those in. Stacy Brooks, I think you've got your hand raised. Do you want to ask your question?
I know you.
Hi, everybody. Hello. I agree with so much that's been said. I just would love to hear your opinions on the role that building trust with the rest of the team plays in all of this. I mean, I think one of the things that helped us a ton was that, we had some foundations laid with our team, that we were hearing their requests and concerned with making those things happen for them. But also, like you guys have alluded to, that we knew we were sort of the nerve center in a lot of ways. We had a finger on the pulse of things going on in the organization that other departments might not have in the same way. So there was a lot that had to do with building trust, that we're looking at everything from the 1,000-foot view. We do want to make our offerings better and have more success and hit the goals that, others want to achieve. But I think that sometimes can be really influential in letting people step out of your way, that they know that you're going to care for their project and their initiative in a way that gets it as much visibility as possible. I would just love to hear if that's been something that you all have seen in other places too.
Rob, why don't you go? Seeing Stacy is our brilliant comms leader, so it's I'm sure she can talk to me at any time and hear me spout off.
Well, I can see her brilliance, so there's no doubt of that. And I appreciate the question, Stacey. That's a great question. So I have a couple thoughts here in that, one of the things, trust is something that I think is hard to define in an organization, and I think that, my approach at least has been, and what I've heard, been successful in some arenas at least, is that there's a focus on, I like to think about, when do I want to have the conversation? And as I just shared a few minutes ago, the wrong time for me to have a conversation with Carla about the product that Carla wants me to market is after Carla's already decided to do the product in the first place. Then at that point, the only thing Carla wants to hear about how you're going to make it successful in the marketplace. If I understand, the planning and development piece, and if it's not there, then I need to create it. But I need to get in front and have that conversation where I'm going to Carla and saying, Carla, here's what happened last year. Here's what I'm seeing. Here are the opportunities. Here's the evaluation. Here are the market opportunities. Here are the market dynamics. These are competitive, all of that type of stuff. If I have that conversation with Carla right after the execution, then it's a fundamentally different conversation. And what I'm really doing is aligning, Carla's interest in her product succeeding with, my interest in making sure that we do the best that we possibly can from a marketing standpoint, because the more that's been thought through up front, then the better my messaging will be. The more creative, I can come up with any kind of creative strategies and tactics, but they will always be limited based on the product itself. I like to say in marketing communications all the time, it's like, I can sell something once. And after that, if the product doesn't really support itself, then it's going to be a challenge from there on out. So, how is it that we can Carla and I can insulate ourselves? And also, even if it fails or it doesn't do as well as we expect, how do we, evaluate that in such a fashion that we can change it moving forward? It's having that conversation up front. So I think that would be my answer to how do I create trust, is, having the thoughtfulness around when to have the conversation. And unfortunately, with marketing, oftentimes, as we talked about, we're in a position of receiving something and then having to do something versus let's think about what we're trying to accomplish. And that's kind of the transition, because I think oftentimes marketers aren't in a position to, and it's not really, they're not brought into that conversation, before there's a problem to be solved. And now it's an acute problem. And now the only thing you can do is to, spend money and spin out a campaign. The problem might be the price point. Hard to have that conversation downstream. So that's, trust to me is building those bridges before you need to use them, is how I would typically kind of approach that.
Yeah, I love that answer. That was a great answer. Stacy, good? That answered your question. Okay, fantastic. We have a question, and this would be for either one of you in the chat. It's really about the person likes the idea about partnering with their associations, sponsors and partners and service providers in the content that they're going to present, but they're concerned about when you are presenting sponsored content, do you need to differentiate it from non-sponsored content, or are we kind of evolving past that, and if you do have to differentiate it, what are some of the ways that you label it in a way that the reader doesn't go, oh, this is going to be a sales pitch, and they go right over it? So I guess that's, is it subtle company branding? Is it no company branding at all and no mention of where the content came from? The sponsors just participating? What are some of your thoughts about that? Do we need to be worrying about that anymore or not? Is that old?
I would say I don't think it's old. I think it's important, and I think it's important that organizations think about that as they're walking down that path. I do think the product itself matters. As an example, if you are talking about white papers, those need to be labeled, in my opinion. And I can tell you that having some really, I guess severe is the wrong word, but let's just say robust conversations with the editorial team about the distinction that you're making are important, because they're journalists, and they want to make sure there's a separation of church and state there, and that classic separation of church and state. When you're talking about some of the experiences, let's say in associations now live, that I mentioned earlier, then I think that's a little bit different. And it's not that there's, we're trying to deceive anyone. But at the same time, it's clear that the sponsor has a role in this because they are participating as active participants in the delivery of it. So, and anyone looking can tell very clearly that the sponsor is supporting it from a, an expense standpoint as well. It's perfectly fine. We're not trying to hide that. But I guess, my answer is that I think it does depend on what the product is. But I would also say that we would never want to shy away from it, and we don't. It's all ears, with regards to, it's all, I should say it's all wide open with respect to this is, something that a sponsor is participating in, and you should know that. There's nothing wrong with that. If we hit the points that we talked about earlier with regards to the value and the quality of that content, then I think it's a question that, a lot of people won't ask from a stakeholder perspective.
Okay, fantastic. We don't have too much time left. We've got about 8 minutes. I think Jen has an interesting question for Scott and CEOs in the universe. Jen, you want to ask that question?
I do, and I hope it's a question that maybe I can ask on behalf of maybe some others who are thinking that. I have always heard from Stacy, frankly, that Scott is an incredible CEO to work with because he has this mentality, and Rob, you have the same. And so, as a Marcom professional, what should we do what if we don't have the unicorn CEO or CMO that we see that really has this, this sort of vision or belief? What are the ways that a Marcom Pro can convince a CEO of this kind of mindset?
I guess my thought is no CEO is going to turn down ideas to make things better or to advance the vision or strategy of the organization. And it really comes from seeing yourself as being a player in that, of saying, how do we sort of advance the goals of the strategic plan? How do we advance our mission? How do we serve our members better? And I think that's actually the orientation. We talk about leader as if it's a prize and it's a job. It's an orientation, it's a way of thinking. And I think if people are asking those questions, you're being a leader. If you're pointing out problems and then giving solutions, saying, we are not coordinating well between departments around pricing, so our marketplace is not understanding this. And we need to work. I have an idea of how we might work together better. I mean, I think the more you do that, the more you're going to be valued as making the CEO look good, as making your C-level staff person look good.
I love that example you gave because it's not just complaining. It's followed up by, I see this and I have an idea on how we can make that better. Rob, what do you think? Have you ever had to convince a CEO of anything related to Marcom?
There's an ongoing conversation, right, with all CEOs. But and Scott is fantastic for the reasons noted. But I think that, and I've worked with Scott, as I mentioned, so he does see the world that way. But what Scott said is exactly what I've done, and I've tried to do that at every single moment. And that being that I'm oftentimes, from an executive standpoint or executive team's perspective, I'm not showing up as a marketing person. I'm showing up as a problem solver. And, marketing can be a part of that answer sometimes, or solution other times it can't. And to Scott's point, one of the things that how I like to think about it is that, let's assume that Scott is a CEO that has no interest whatsoever in marketing and doesn't care about the creative, maybe doesn't value marketing at all, and just sees it as a place to, dump ideas that someone should execute on and should execute on. And when that's the case, what Scott will care about is, as he said, what are the things that will move the organization forward? And if I'm having that kind of conversation with Scott, then, chances are that we'll come to some common ground there, because I could have a conversation about, Scott, are we maximizing our revenue from your perspective? Because here's what I'm seeing. That's a different conversation. Now, I know that there's a product management component of that. I know there's a marketing component of that. The other piece that I'd share real quickly is that for us to remember, at least I think about it this way, is that marketing is often perceived as an expense, which it is. I always kind of walk around with the mentality of, I don't want marketing to be expense. I want it to be a revenue driver. And that's how I try to think about it and how I try to deliver it, so that I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking, Scott, do you want to be successful? I'm not asking, Scott, do you want to spend more money on marketing?
I mean, there's a big difference between marketing person saying, I want our marketing to be flashier and cooler, and saying, I want to do something to appeal to younger members. We really need to reposition how we are approaching younger members. I don't know a CEO who's going to say, "Oh no, I don't want to be appealing to younger members." It's I think being executive, being a leader, being a driver is about solving problems. And I think actually brilliant that Rob said, you can take the marketing language out of it, and frame it in a way that your CEO is going to understand. I mean, that your CEO, it's a problem that they want to address.
Mhm. Yeah, fantastic. I love it. We're down to the last couple of minutes. One of the key things I'm taking away from this is that we as Marcom professionals have to stop thinking of ourselves as service providers, that we have to start thinking of ourselves as leaders of change, as people that are leaders ourselves, and that we have great ideas because of our unique perspective, and that we don't have to sabotage ourselves either by assuming that no one will listen or no one will care because we're just Marcom, right? That we need to get out of our own way, right? Get out of our own way and bring the conversation to the table. So in the last minute for each of you, any parting comments, anything that you want to wrap up or say before we send everyone on their way for the afternoon? And by the way, shout out to all the dogs. Hopefully I'm not too early on that. They've all done really well. All right, go ahead. Whoever wants to go first. Any parting comments?
Rob, you to start?
So I guess, yeah, my parting comment is simply that, as we've said, I'll just underscore this, show up as a problem solver. It's not about marketing. It's not about, the flashy campaigns per se. It's about driving change. And if we're thinking about it from a revenue standpoint, if we're thinking about it from an organizational positioning and advantageous perspective, then we're having the right conversation. The marketing conversations I pull in when I need to, but that's not the starting point. So that's the point.
Yeah.
Just embrace that is what
I
would
love
say.
it. So if you're going to show up at the table, show up as a problem solver. Okay. And Scott?
I guess I would say if you want to be perceived as a leader, lead. And you have to actually act like a leader. And that the second thing I would say is leaders ask good questions. And so often, and this is true of our entire marketing communications team, they will ask a question that, I'll say it throws me on my ass. I mean, just completely like, oh, that changes everything. That's not at all what I was thinking. And that, I think being able to ask deep questions is sort of core to being an effective leader and being a change agent in an organization.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So the takeaway there is, don't be afraid to ask your CEO the tough questions. Yeah, that's what. Anything else, Scott? Did you want to add?
Nope, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Jen, anything we need to say to our wonderful members before they head out?
I'm so thankful to be part of the conversation, and Scott and Rob, thank you so much for joining. Everyone, it's great to see your squares, if not your faces. And so thank you for being here, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.